Powderhorn Park now. And another interesting aspect to what's been going on is the creation of all sorts of various neighborhood defense committees. People going block by block, organizing with their neighbors. And it's interesting to see the sort of mixed results you get from that. A lot of it has to do with the sort of like political and class composition of that particular space. You see a lot of, upper middle.
Yes, hello. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So we're moving now to just give us to Clifton Arihwakehte, a Mohawk land defender.
Can you all hear me? Should I start?
Yes.
Sego sewo gwego Arihwakehte gadgets. Ganastaga nagwa ganegere Kanienkehaka to. My name is Clifton Arihwakehte. I'm a Kanienkehaka Mohawk from northwest Montreal. I've been involved in land defense and indigenous activism for over 30 years, and I've seen a lot of police violence over those 30 years in regards to our people standing and asserting their rights, be it to an economy, be it to exploiting our natural resources from hunting or fishing. We get the heavy hand of the law in the Canadian state all the time. Since this pandemic has started, a very sad statistic is coming out of Ungwehunwe country, which is 8 indigenous people have been murdered by police since March of 2020. And it doesn't seem to be having any reprieve from it. It just keeps getting worse and worse. Just prior to the lockdown here in my province where I'm staying in Quebec, we had blocked off the railroads to prevent a police excursion into Winnistoughton and the Unistoten people in British Columbia and Wet'suwet'en people in Unistoten. And basically we had it all blocked off, and all the races and all the right-wing groups started coming to light. Because of that, we're able to identify a number of right-wing Nazi groups in and around our communities and in Quebec. And over the last couple of years, since a lot of this stuff has been coming a little bit more into the mainstream, I've had a lot of my comrades here who've been doing a lot to expose these groups to the public. I think that's very important. We need to know who these people are. And here in Quebec, we've had mosque shootings. It's one of the more polarized places in Canada as far as racism is concerned. We have a law in the books called Law 21, which is an anti-Muslim law that's been put through by the Coalition Avenir Quebec, which is the right-wing group that's in power right now in the government of Quebec. And this is the group too that has a high level of denial when it comes to Indigenous rights, our rights to property, our rights to an economy, our rights to safety in our community. These people don't care about that, and they've been really pushing the whole resource extraction agenda further and further and further. And that's a big issue for us as Indigenous people, is resource extraction. And what happens with resource extraction is the upturn in murdered and missing women who happen to be targeted by the man camps that come along with resource extraction. It's quite a sordid story in Canada. I mean, Canada tries to get a pass as being a friendly place and a polite place, but the racism is institutionalized. As an Indigenous person, I'm obligated to walk around with an identity card that says my race. Like, we're one of the only peoples in North America that, I think we are the only peoples, Indigenous people, that have to prove our race on a constant. We have to carry it as official ID. I don't know where I put my card. I had it out here, and I wish I could show you the card, because there's a card and it's issued by the Canadian government, right? Status card. If you look at the levels of injustice that have occurred also in the court system when it involves an Indigenous person being murdered by a white person, there is zero justice in Canada for that. 2 famous cases of Indigenous teenagers being murdered by white people. One is Colton Bushi, who was shot by a white farmer, who only got charged for misuse of a firearm, and murder didn't count. Another one would be Tina Fontaine, who was murdered and dismembered by a white man who picked her up the streets of Winnipeg, Manitoba. These are just some of the most highlighted cases, but there are thousands upon thousands of missing and murdered women. And most of these missing and murdered women are either covered up by police or the people who made them go missing are the police. So we have a large issue going on in the community as far as land, resource extraction, police brutality, and the Canadian colonial laws. Canada has the progenitor of South African apartheid laws. They call it the Indian Act. So the Indian Act was written in the late 1870s, and it was basically the laws that the colonialists will use to regulate the Indian problem. And this law was copied by the South African authorities in the 40s. So Canada is the granddaddy of all these apartheid laws. It comes from that British colonialism again that we've been suffering under the yoke of for far too long. Like I begin when I was speaking in Kanienkehaka, my language, I make it a point to speak that language every time I do any public engagement, because that language is a deviant language that was beaten out of my grandparents. And I speak it with pride, and I try to push it as far as we can with as much as we can, because this is all we have. And during the COVID crisis at this moment, we got all kinds of racism from the neighboring towns because we decided to close our community off from the outsiders, because we're a very, very vulnerable population. A lot of us, we share a lot of vulnerabilities like other poor people of color, that we relate in a big time towards the Black community. I mean, we can see so many similarities across the board. And I'm so glad to be seeing that the Black and Indigenous communities are sharing those voices together. This is key. This is key. This is where we're going to be doing what we need to do to forward what we need to do for ourselves and to make justice happen. I'll say more later on. I mean, there's a list of things to talk about that we'd be here for hours just on Indigenous issues. But I do believe that it's one of the more pressing issues, because everything that's predicated in the justice scenarios in North America is being predicated on stolen land. It has to be remembered in that way. Yeah, go. Thank you.
I think now we move to our two speakers here in Athens with us, with Lauretta and Macauley. We'll start with Lauretta. So we need to... Lauretta is from the United African Women Organization in Athens, an activist group, as well as you tell us more about your group and what you think about matter, but as well what it is to be a person of color in Athens.
Hello, everyone. As Penny said, I'm from the United African Women Organization. I will start when I arrive in Greece from my country, Sierra Leone. Since when I arrived from Sierra Leone in Greece, not only me, a lot of African people, when we arrive, we ask to be legal, to have our resident permit and to live like human beings. But that one take all our lifetime to find resident permit. And what happened is some of us leave our family back home with the expectation that when we arrive in Greece or anywhere else that we can go, because nobody understands why we left our country. And I think anybody in your correct mind will not just, when things is going very nice in your country, you will not just decide to leave. A lot of people don't know about that. But the problem with us is just like a political oppression. You ask to be legal, and they make you intentionally not to be legal. And some of our sisters from African descent has to bring manage to bring their family, their son. But the problem is now that every time they face police oppression, they have to arrest their son in the streets, take them to the police station for no reason. Some were even born here in Greece. But they kept oppressing African descent like we are criminals. And what is that is, we are not criminals. We are just trying to live our life in freedom. We want to have freedom in our life. But what the worst thing they did to Africans is that in generally, the passport, even the passport we are holding, anywhere you go in this world, this particular world we are living, you have to face oppression. Not only because of your color, because also you have this same African passport. So you have to go through, for this color we have, you have to go through a lot of suppression. You understand? Police brutalities, our children sometimes playing in the park. Police come and harass them. Sometimes they take them to the police station. I can say, for example, that a woman in our organization, her son was arrested, let me say more than 10 times, because they suspect that he's a criminal. They suspect that when something happened, any kind of criminal activities, they have to arrest you, that they take the boy all the time, arrest him to the police station. He has to go. And his mother has to be crying, psychological problems. And they don't have no reason for that. They cannot even say sorry because of that. They can just take your time. Psychological problem. These children have a psychological problem. Take their time, take them to the police station, and nothing end up with that. When they feel, they leave them. You understand? And they kept making barriers for you not to be legal. Well, when you don't make me legal, how can I live? When you walk in the streets, they ask you for your resident permit. But you didn't make us legal. Some of us, when we try to, we apply for the citizenship, they said, why do you need to become a citizen? Do you have any sickness, how they call it? Do you have any sickness that you are going to die so that you can make it more faster? Or else you have to wait more than 5 or 6 years. Some people wait for 20 years or so, up till now. You understand? They kept putting barriers. So as you as African descent, because they are doing it intentionally, you as African descent, you are not supposed to be a free. But I can leave it now to Penny. I can stop for now.
Yes,
I will continue.
Yeah, we will have the questions afterwards. Anyway,
Okay.
we'll have the discussion. So we can go to Michaelis and from the ANASA, Athens.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael. I represent a cultural center that is kind of dedicated to the empowerment of the second generation youths, the youths that are of African descent and they are born here in Greece, and also representing through the cultural center an attempt and an effort that goes almost 20 years now into the empowerment of the African communities that they are living in Greece. Regarding the movement Black Lives Matters, the timing of such kind of movement gave the opportunity for many other voices to rise and give through that energy their own voice. And it kind of empowers us now here in Greece, and mostly the youths that suddenly they could see something that they could also identify, because they do have African origins, but they are born here in Greece, so they are more connected with what has to do with the African of diaspora, with what has to do with the African American movement that has a long history. It goes back to the slave trade era. And as a cultural center, we always try to keep that information, that a lot of things that are happening generally to the African community, and even in Africa, are connected with the slave trade and are connected with policies that the states were implementing at that time, which also affected the whole world, since the states are the primal one world power, till now at least. So ideas about color have been transmuted to the rest through such kind of practices, which wasn't also the states that they were practicing. There were also the English, the Portuguese, the Belgians. So a lot of the migrants and refugees that they are coming in Europe are coming from their countries. Their countries are still affected from policies that are taken from the time of slave trade. So slave trade might ended, but the policies are there. The people that manipulate the resources are there. So this has an effect even to the migration now. Let's see, African refugees and African migrants that are living from their countries are very affected from the situation. The African American movement had a very vast history, which was being recorded, and gave us also a very good glimpse of what was happening. So that kind of information empowered and still empowers African descendant in Europe, African of diaspora. They are more connected with that. So Black Lives Matters kind of gave a sparkle here in Greece to that movement, to those youths that at a point when was in issues that had to do with citizenship, they were kind of like more, blasé, or more, okay, kind of like it's normal to have citizenship without having any recollection of the struggle that happened. Because now youths do have citizenship, but it took us almost 15 years, and I was part of that movement. And Lauretta was part of that movement. The African women organization were the first that they were doing the movement of no racism in babies' court. So now suddenly, what we were talking about racism and about constitutional racism, suddenly on Black Lives Matters, a movement that now, that was before, but now is in its peak due to the fact of the murder of George Floyd, suddenly unifies all the African diaspora. This is my feeling, and I can see it here in Greece, but also unifies the struggle of all people that are fighting for equal rights and justice. And, I feel really kind of like privileged to be part of that movement, because, at first, Black movement was a movement that, it was very uprised on 60s and 70s. And after that, it kind of like wore off, where we see all this injustice happening. But this is an injustice that it happens also to the rest of the Europe, suddenly, to all Black people, to all people of color. It's very difficult, when stereotypes have been traveled away, and stereotypes do travel away, and they can travel very fast. You can suddenly be a victim of those stereotypes, even in Europe. And we feel we kind of see all this era with a very excitement.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Thank you very much, Michalis and Lauretta. So I think now is the time, and Angela. Angela is not with us because she couldn't connect. I can go back just to briefly read her kind of notes. Give me a second, which is a response from what's happening in Chicago right now. And I think it's quite important to add her comments here because to give an extra view of what's happening back in the States. So according to Angela McClanahan-Simmons, who lives at the moment, she's from Illinois, and she has done research in Detroit and particularly in the African-American community. And now she's moved to Chicago. She says these particular things. Like all major cities in the US, the killing of George Floyd amplified existing issues and sparked an overt uprising about the use of force within the police in Chicago. Known for its history of violence against people of color and particularly African Americans in the city, the CPD was already under scrutiny by activist groups for the 2014 killing of a 17-year-old Laken McDonald, who was walking away from police and shot in the back. This is an event that resonates most with the killings that have been discussed over the last decade, but there is a well-established history of complaints against the CPD that go back decades and accompany corruption within city government, which have been the subject of discussion alongside the systemic racism of the Cook County penal system, more generally amongst prison abolition movements, which have gained traction in around the last decade. Amidst this, the CPU had petitioned the Illinois Supreme Court to destroy all records of complaints of police brutality more than 5 years old. I want to briefly establish a timeline for the last month and how the Floyd, Arbery, Taylor uprisings were fueled by existing discussions around systemic racism in Chicago. So in around March and April, when the governor of Illinois announced that the United States' second full state lockdown, an urgent conversation was happening in the Black Lives Matter and groups like the Chicago Alliance against racial and political repression about the risks involved to prisoners being held in the Cook County Jail, one of the biggest jails in the country, and BLM has long argued that the system discriminates against those who can't afford representation or bail money. And we know, of course, what happened with one of the policemen of the Floyd case who got out because of paying his bail. History of withholding phone calls, lawyers, etc. So Chicago was one of the cities that reported disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on Black and Brown residents. Core morbidities, living conditions owing to decades of divestment on the south and west sides, food deserts, and trauma and unemployment. Direct action was being organized to support these communities by radical and direct action groups like Brave Space Alliance, a Black-led, trans-led LGBTQ center working on the south side of Chicago. Translated to Cook County Jail, which was responsible for 1 in 6 of Chicago positive COVID tests in the recent months. The weekend after the George Floyd murder, demonstration ramped up to CCJ, car caravans, but also various peaceful demonstrations in city center and on the west side. BLM reported more than 2,000 arrests that weekend. Police also let looting occur. The mayor raised the bridges leading out of downtown, so protesters were trapped without food and subject to arrest. Recognized white supremacist involvement in protests, looting memes in neighborhoods. So protests leading to the building of movements. So the direct action asked this: jail support, food support, calling mayor, state's attorney to demand release of prisoners, Chicago Community Bond Fund, and less radical actions. Groups like My Block, My Hood, My City, taking food donations, money to rebuild Black businesses that were affected by protests and looting. And the most the most urgent discussions are the following. Radical, defunding police and abolishing the Cook County Jail. BLM, Brave Space Alliance, other abolitionist groups are supporting this. Marches, car caravans in various places, including the jail, places where police have murdered victims, and the mayor house, basically to have marches in front of the mayor's house. So these discussions are overtly anti-capitalist and center on the police as an institution that historically prevented runaway slaves and whose purpose is to maintain concentrated wealth. So it goes this way, and I think the last one is this, which I say the presence of police in Chicago public schools to be abolished. And this is from the Chicago's Teachers Union, one of the most radical unions in the country, which BLM and the Chicago Alliance Against Racial and Political Repression are involved in. And it was voted 4-3. However, to keep the police within the schools, basically, with a 33 million contract. And this happened this week. So this is the end of Angela's kind of position. Yeah. So I think now, waiting for Thanasis to come back, we can move to questions. Don't know if Thanasis, I think he has some questions to the speakers in United States, but also to our two speakers here, Lauretta and Michalis. So, Thanasis, do you have any questions to make generally or to open it up to the audience? Or to discuss further, because it's a little bit...
I have breaking news from Minneapolis.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
So, I just got word that our city council has voted unanimously to abolish the police. So it's a victory, but I'm going to tell you that I do feel a little bit skeptical about this because, when liberals say we need to abolish the police, they're using our language, and I'm telling you they're going to replace it with something different, right? Especially when we talk about its effect on indigenous communities. You see how things like CPS and medical health systems have been used to imprison. I'm someone who's experienced medical incarceration myself. So when I say we need to abolish the police, and this was my suggestion for the name of this talk is the abolish police. But yes, but we need to abolish policing, right? That we need to abolish the police in our heads and in our actions and in our behaviors and in our thoughts. So I'm going to see how far this goes. It's an interesting victory, symbolic victory in some ways, but we have to find out what happens next.
Great news. Great news day, and of course, by what you said last, I would like to ask something, not only you, to everyone that participates. I mean, okay, I think that there are some specific demands that came out during this uprise. Among one very important is abolish police. But as you all said before, there is a big pluralism in the activism and in the way that each one attends these events and this uprise, with many different efforts, many different experiments, structures all over the states, in indigenous lands, everywhere that it can reach. So what I want to ask is that this diversity, which is very good and which creates things to come and new things that we haven't seen yet, and we will, I'm sure about that. But do you think that there is some specific demands that bring everyone together? I mean, okay, I mean, abolish the police, of course, bring everyone together all around the world. It's not just the States, so very, I think, from our side at least. Allah. I mean, do you think that there could be something like a campaign connecting all the most of the struggling of the place of struggle, let's say, all around the states, and could lead to something more, let's say, interacting, more, not more organized, because everything that's happening is amazingly organized, and we see things that we've never seen before. But do you think that it would, it's something that maybe some demands or a specific campaign that could make it more specific and breed specific results more quickly? I don't know if I'm quite understand. You understand exactly what I want to say. Allah, I mean, in very few words. We have heard, for example, specific demands in Seattle, specific demands in Detroit, specific demands in which some are common. Do you think that out of this there can be something that can lead a campaign that will break the borders also of the states? It will be hung by many people abroad from Europe and not only, and could bear a result that will also exceed the borders of the states itself. This is to everyone, and like a question, and maybe help the discussion also to the comrades here that are here now present with nosotros. Brother, okay, you can speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. I think the biggest thing that we have to do, first of all, is challenge the whole idea of the right of discovery. Start from that. I mean, we can't have any justice, again, like I said, on stolen land, with stolen children and stolen minds, because we're dealing with an addicted population, addicted to control, addicted to policing, and they can't even admit they're addicted to policing. Can't even admit they're addicted to the society that's gotten them running back and forth, destroying their only shelter. So it has to start there. I mean, it sounds like, okay, yeah, like it's a sizable demand, right? But you think about it, the basis of the United States, the basis of Canada, the basis of all colonial society is on the right of discovery, the so-called divine right of the white man to dispossess the person of color, essentially. This has to be challenged. This has to be challenged at the international level. Then we can move forward on redressing what was done to the African, what is done to the indigenous people, again, with that in mind, how they pitted the African against indigenous people in some regards, how they dispossessed other people of color throughout the world. I mean, it has to start there. There has to be an admittance of that. And there isn't. It's this fruity bouquet of bullshit they call colonialism, and the discovery, the Mayflower, these benevolent Europeans landing on the shores, but no, they left their petulant children here, and we want that to be taken care of. And in Europe, that's your responsibility, take care of your children, but your children are out of hand. They're so out of hand they kill their own gods. So that's a problem with me. I have a problem with all of that, because they base everything on the word of God, and we know that God is a terrible landlord. Just look at Palestine. So we have to start there. We have to address these things on that manner. Then we move forward. When you want to get.
Is someone else who wants to talk?
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Tia. Hi, I'm Tia Edison. I'm also with the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, who is a sister organization to the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And one of the demands that we have is a civilian police review board with subpoena power. We had accomplished that back in 1999, but then they merged the city and the county together, and it's sunset. So we're trying to regain that power so that when the police officers murder, execute someone, that they're not being investigated by themselves, like by their own, that we have a say-so in getting the evidence that's needed to prosecute them. Because right now, with the Breonna Taylor case, we have so much false information that's going on, and it's taken a long time to get to the Attorney General, and that's why we haven't had it. We've had one officer fired now, but all of the rest of the information is so biased.
And the officer that was fired wasn't fired for this case. He was fired for his past stuff leading up to this. And so it was just easier. And so one thing that I didn't mention as we are as we are trying to maintain, not trying, as we are maintaining our space across from the mayor's office, is that we're there because the mayor is telling us that based on their contract with the FOP, that they're unable to fire the officers. And we're waiting now for our Attorney General with the state to make a decision to charge and arrest them. And so there's this whole back and forth of who's responsible, who can do what, who can't do what, based on what may come down the pike later. And so we're finding ourselves having to have this conversation, this struggle on 3 or 4 fronts. And so although fire, arrest, and charge is our immediate demand, we do have the demand around the Civilian Review Board. We also like Chicago, have armed officers going to be in our classrooms this next year. We also are looking at transparent policies and investigative procedures. And so there are several organizations across the city, not just ours, that are working on several levels of demands. We just passed locally Breonna's law, which was to ban no-knock warrants, which is what allowed, which was what gave the officers the space to go into Breonna's house and murder her. And so we're looking at national and statewide and national legislation around that. And so all of those things are happening in conjunction with maintaining that space and demanding the immediate demand of fire, arrest, and charge.
Thank you very much. I don't know if is anyone else who wants to add anything from United States in particular, and then we can move back a little bit here in Athens, or you want to ask the people here in Athens something in particular, vice versa.
I would just like to add and not talk again, because I wait to hear much more interesting from you. That what I saw in Athens, in the last, for example, big demo about solidarity, about the uprising in the States, it was incredible, the number of the people that attended for the reasons that they did. What I mean is that, as you know, Greece was traditionally anti-American country because of the junta, of the strong communist element and everything. So all the times that there were people gathered to regarding something American was against it, against presidents that visited, against wars that happened or stuff like that. It's the first time where massively people, especially youth, gathered in a large demo of 10,000 people about supporting the people of the United States, showing solidarity to them, showing solidarity to the people who have a struggle there. It was the first time that this happened. It happened very dynamically, with very nice Molotovs thrown in the American embassy, organized ones, and everything was, the tension was very big, and the will and the desire to participate was huge. This was a sign to me, as well as what happened in Paris, where also people fought back the caps in solidarity with the United States. It's so that all over the world, this thing triggered something. That's why before I said that maybe there could be some demands, or there could be something that we could really break the borders, really try to interact with each other, raise maybe a common goal, a common agenda, a common thing, I don't know, a common day against the police all over the world. I don't know what this could be to start with, or to be part of what we are already doing. So that's why I thought it's very important to say that, and I feel this, I don't know how everyone feels like that, but I feel that it's time us to really interact with each other. And because globalization, it's not about economy, it's not about fucking money or capital, it's about people. We should have this world, not the bastards that are in the authority and everything, okay? So, I mean, it's time for us to unite, try to do that, break the borders and the fence between us, and try to bring something more solid with continuity. That's why I made this question, and that's how I tried to anyway open the discussion about this. That's why I asked about the demands. Anyway, to clear I want just to clear this a bit. So, yeah, we could.
Thank you, Thanasis, for the position. Is anyone from here, from the audience, that would like to say anything or to ask questions to our speakers from who are online? Yes. If you have something to say, sorry. Okay. Clifton. Okay, Clifton. Clifton, is Clifton with us?
Yes, I just like to again elaborate on that whole idea of indigenous, Black and Mexican unity, right? And challenging and the abandonment of the veneration of that political office of the President of the United States. I mean, this is the problem right here. You're vesting everything in the leadership of a single person. That's not a system that's natural to Turtle Island, which is my homeland. Our homeland is a system that everybody has a voice, particularly the women and the men, in equal standing. This is what's negated in there. You know, we have a name for a president in my language. We call it Rodinu Wateka. It means village burner. Every president since George Washington has been called that. And there's a lot of truth behind that, because they're still burning villages everywhere. Okay? And that's the problem we have to challenge. With the Black community, the Mexican community, and the indigenous community stand up together. We are more numerous than that. Let's stop being suckers for that system and for that wanting to strive to be like them. I keep hearing people about being equal. Let's transcend that. Well, I don't want to be equal to these people because they're destroying everything. Their equality is not something that is conductive to forwarding humanity. And being equal to white Americans is being equal to destruction. We're better than that. We have to move beyond that and move that. Like if I ask people, what are you? Say, I'm an American. So I don't want an excuse. I want to know who you are. And that's what it is. It's been an excuse for my dispossession and your oppression, and my oppression too, and murder of my people. Again, you know, like on the reserves, there are some of the most polluted places in North America because of environmental racism. I mean, the issues of indigenous people are incredible. You know, we're the only population that has gone to war with the United States is still being punished for going to war with them. But if you do that to the other enemies that they've had. Anyways, we can go on for all night in those ones, but I just wanted to add that I think it's important that we do that together, that we have to really work hard towards making bridges and maintaining them and understanding each other. Because in my community, there's a lot of anti-Black bigotry amongst my people that I work on a daily to try and dispel, as well as bigotry towards Palestinians, even though we're so similar in our things. Because again, we're being hit over the head constantly by religion and this poisonous culture that has done nothing good for us. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Clifton, very much for this position. I just wanted to ask Michael next to me, just for a sec. I can remember very well that you had organized, or you were part of the organization of an event in Platia Amerikis, which is the apparently it's called American Square, and is obviously the African enclave in Athens, and it was for the Black Lives Matter. Can you tell us a little bit about this particular event and what it means for you as a person, you know, living in Athens again, as I said, of African descent, and organizing this particular, you know, to what was happening in.
Well, the thing is that what goes on generally regarding human rights in the States and the movement that has grown up actually questions some things that has to do with racism. It questions police brutality. It questions things. In our case here in Greece, as I said before, I'm a member of an organization that we try to empower youths that they are born in Greece and that they are African descent. Probably you might not know that, but 15, 20 years ago, there were no laws and legislations that kind of but give citizens to youth that they are born in Greece of African descent. They were like kind of like second-class citizens. So a movement around 2000 came up, and that was like the first generation of second generation that they were like kind of more up to the political scene and what goes on. But then, you know, it's not like in the States that, you know, you have a big Black and African community and with a long time and year and centuries actually of existence in the place. Here it's only like 30 years. So the first line of defense, let's say, was kind of like falling up. So the youths of the community were not participating so much on political issues that were arising regarding housing, regarding work, and even though if they had gained the citizenship after that, after 15 years of struggle, and the event that came up that was made on last week was actually an initiative by those youths. The youths, for actually as long as I'm living, for the first time, they were more active as citizens. They wanted to participate. They thought that they can reflect on what goes on in the States, things that they matter for them also, being Black in Greece. The youth felt a resonance and a closeness to what goes on. So they decided that they were supposed to take the initiative. So from our behalf, what we wanted to do is to empower that move, to support them in any way, get them the licenses, electricity, all the equipment for the sound, for them to do it, to make it happen, and feel that yes, they can participate in the society, they can present their ideas, their voices can be raised. Black Lives Matter raise a question and raise its voice on oppression. And oppression is the same everywhere. So that sparkle, that fire, let's say, sparkles also around the globe. So people are feeling more motivated in taking that torch and put fire on their places. Something new.
Thank you. I'm just going to give, yes, Laura.
I think this is a chain that we have to break. Because long time ago, they were putting chains in our feet and in our hand. And some of them see that, they said, let us change the system. Let us take the chains out of their feet and their hand. And they use another strategy to enslave us more. You understand? So I think this Black Lives Matter will break the chain if we all organize together and we have this thing that they call solidarity together, because there are a lot of this slavery going on. Now is the invisible chain we are working with. It's the invisible chain that nobody sees. Before that chain was seen by some human being and they said, move it out. So they make the invisible chains in our feet and our hand now. Nobody see. Who can tell if I'm walking in the streets now, I have chain? Because they don't see it. They don't know that I am under slavery. It's my passport. With my color. Nobody knows about that. So I'm very happy this thing, not happy exactly that somebody was killed and they were killing most of our people secretly, but this came out. So I think it's something that we all have to try to break this invisible chain. Try to change, to make who don't see the invisible chain should see it all over the globe. in Africa, in Europe, all over the globe, they should see that. Because like in Africa now, Africa is still in slavery. What? With the invisible chain that I'm telling you about, we cannot move anywhere. For example, an African woman and an American or European woman will be traveling. But because of your passport, you cannot go nowhere. You understand? So these are the chains that we all have to join to change it, for us to have human rights, equal rights, and how they call it, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, and freedom of everything. You understand? So let us join together. Let us stay with this fight. Let us don't change it at all. Let us bring all of the secrets hiding chain that they are putting upon us. So thank you very much, and let's continue the fight.
Thank you, Lauretta. Thank you. So as I said before, if anyone wants to raise a question to the people from the United States or Michalis and Lauretta here. Yes, and Clifton, as I understood, needs to leave soon. So if you have any question to Clifton, please raise it now. Clifton, do you want to say anything more before you go? So, because I know that you have very short time before you need to go. Yes, just a second.
Is good now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I would just like to say it's nice to be able to connect the way we are, to move this thing forward. I mean, I'm very grateful to be in a circle with people, to be informed from other things besides CNN. You know, it's nice to get some actual grassroots information about what's going on, the realities that's going on. I would just implore everybody to please be safe, and we're needed to keep this momentum going. Just be safe is what I got to say in closing. Yeah, go.
Brother, thank you very much. It was an honor to have you with us. Your contribution was huge. And as you said, I hope that this is not just one-off. I think that's something that can continue and can connect us more and can connect us even more than we are doing now. Thank you very much for everything. Thank you. Can we have 1 second, because Marietta here wants to ask something. Once.
It's not exactly a question, but I think, Clifton, you raised a very important point when you talked about racism, which is against many nations across the globe. And one of them, which is also very, which here in Greece we are also interested in, is also the struggle of the Palestinians against the militarized state of and the state of exclusion and apartheid they are living in every day, which should and is being linked with the Black Lives Matter movement now, as regards the stance and the attitude that we all must take against racism. Thank you for raising that point. Thank you. I would say thank you to all the speakers for sharing your very, very useful information. And we continue with the other questions.
Does anyone have any specific question for the speakers? Because also we have something sent from some we could ask directly to the speakers. If no one from the people who are present want to ask something.
I just wanted to address briefly, kind of bridge to what comrades in Greece are saying or asking to American comrades. I think Americans now are realizing that collective liberation comes through collective mass action. I think as a way forward, fostering that and creating room where more voices can be heard is the only way to achieve that. Like solidarity meaning, standing up against racism meaning taking the same risks. So I think we're finally learning that in this country, and we've long, coming from the anarchist community, we've long looked at places like Greece, or that's kind of an example of what things could be like. So it's pretty moving to be a part of something this big.
Okay, that was great point. But here, I don't know, you don't have picture. There are some people gathered. There is also an event in the square now, so maybe that's why it reaches you some noise. Anyway, I think there are two questions that I saw sent from some people, and maybe it would be interesting since I don't see someone asking from the people who are gathered here yet. Have to do with two things. One is a question about violence, having to do, for example, that through an effort of the Republicans and liberals, as I saw, I don't know, I mean, you should answer that. You have lived the situation. Many Republicans and liberals starting to demonize Antifa, for example, by using excessive violence or by using violence in generally in the demos and the protests. And this, I think, in some cases, it polarized a bit the movement, because some part of the movement maybe kept it their ears open to this kind of voices. So a discussion happened, a dialogue emerged about that, which in my opinion wasn't the best time to happen, even if it had a basis. I think that led also Trump say that Antifa maybe is a terrorist organization. And anyway, I think it brought polarization in a time it shouldn't. I would like your opinions about that. And I would just say an example. Last week, for example, I saw online something that I shared on my Facebook page. Some people were calling for rape to go to CHAZ, to the Seattle Autonomous Zone, so that they rape women, because there are no police there anymore. So they should dress as revolutionaries, as they said, try to get a woman in an alley and try to rape them. For example, to me, it's obvious that you need someone to secure the place by, and you can't do it also with flowers. You need other ways. But this is the one question having to do with violence. And the other question, very briefly, is that we have seen all over, like also CHAZ and in many other situations, experiments of autonomy. The experiments that through self-organizing and through direct democracy, I don't know in which ways, people take the situation in their hands and they run the community themselves. I would like some opinions or some your experience as you have lived it in the last weeks about these two, since there are what I say now, it's about 3 or 4 questions that I try to merge into 2 points. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is Nick over here in Seattle, and I'll take on a bit of that as well. I'll try to start an answer here as I'm thinking on the spot, especially since some of it is related to CHAZ. And it's true, we have gotten a lot of threats from the right wing, like people coming in. We started off even before the autonomous zone was set up. There was a shooting that had happened. Somebody drove their car into the crowd and then shot someone who was like trying to stop the car. And that was before the zone was even set up. And that person ended up being the brother of a policeman who was at the East Precinct. And there's been various other threats as well. We would have cars drive by with their license plates taken off the vehicle and cameras, and people would spot guns in some of these cars as well. So there definitely has been a lot of discussions about security over time at the CHAZ. And it's certainly a thing that I'm interested in, well, especially being in the club that I am. Like, those are all like big priority discussions. It's something that we think about quite a bit in general as well. It's like when we abolish the police, like, what are we replacing it with? To take a lot of care that we're not just replacing it with more police, that you are killing the cop in your head, so to speak, and trying to spread this idea that you are not like peace policing or stopping other people from raising their voices and other things like that too. And in general, not recolonizing the space. The Seattle Autonomous Zone kind of came up by accident. Nobody was really expecting the police to vacate the area. Nobody was really violent towards them, and I'm pretty sensitive towards claims of that, because the Seattle police have been trying to make it look like protesters have been violent when they haven't been. And I'm in the club that had Willem Van Spronson in it. Like, he was a friend of mine, and that's like, he was involved in the detention center down in Tacoma, where it's like those has also gotten a lot of claims of terrorism and whatnot. So to have this space come about relatively non-violently, or just non-violently at all, except for the police, I think is a factor there too. So trying to get everybody on board with the idea that we're not going to like re-police things. I think in Seattle, there have been a lot of people who are just in the community who have been concerned with the security of the space. There have been threats of right-wing groups coming in on July 4th. Again, it's a very nationalist holiday here in the United States. And a lot of right-wingers have threatened to come by and tear up barricades and do other things like that too. I think there is an understanding that there's no amount of barricading that could really stop the police from coming in and using as much force if they wanted to. There's a bit of like political reasons why they're not coming in. But regardless, like, people do think a lot about how to defend themselves. Washington State in the United States is a place where people can open carry illegally. And myself, like, I don't open carry within the space because like, I'm very white, obviously, and I don't want to make the appearance of. I just think that's bad optics for me to carry, but I encourage other people to, for sure. We have Black members who have open carried on the premises as well. So that's one part of it. But also, in terms of like other security too, there's been a lot more focus on like de-escalation and being able to handle like mental health crisis without having the first person on the scene be the person with a gun. And that's something, obviously, the police here in the United States, they don't handle it the same way. Oftentimes, the first person for any situation is the police officer with very little mental health crisis training, but a lot of gun training, or so-so gun training, and that's just not right as well. So it's really like, how do we replace that and then not recolonize and not reintroduce some of the racist system that already exists. We've had a lot of different groups spring up, a lot of individuals that have sort of like formed a collective. I don't think it's perfect. I think there's still a lot of reaction, and that's like one thing that the police are known for. They're reactionary. They respond to crime and don't really prevent it. But I also think that because of the zone popping up in the way that it did, it's helped build a community. For people who are unhoused, we would hear a lot of comments that this has been a great thing for them. Like, all of the mutual aid in the area, all of the people who are there to provide services as opposed to providing the violence that the police would bring, has been great for the unhoused people in our community who don't have to worry about food so much. That have people in the area that know it's like when they are reacting to something, if they're having like if they're interacting with people and other people don't understand what's going on, someone can just come by and give them a cigarette, and that's enough to solve the issue where everybody is happy. yeah, it's not perfect in regards to like if a right winger came in, would they be identified? Would we be able to stop certain threats? I think I don't know. It's going to take a lot of time to figure that out. Like how do we get enough people there who would be able to stop all these threats? Like anybody who wants to do harm. And I think there's a bit of community building to get to that point. And just the absence of police has opened up that space to where some of the community can get together and figure out some of those problems. Whereas when the police were in the area, they would often be the one-stop solution for a lot of these things, and a really bad solution that would keep those conversations from happening.
Thank you very much. Yes, Jay, yes, please.
Yeah, going back to the first part of that question, talking about like parallels between the Republican and Democratic Party and the way that they really work. I think it's really important to note that in the United States, these two parties really are not that separate. They have the same masters, which is like the ruling class. They both serve capital and empire. And the differences between the two are often marginal. It's the difference between, the carrot and the stick, and whether, I would rather unyoke myself from this whole oppressive system or not, is the question that we should be asking, right? For example, locally, our councilwoman, Andrea Jenkins, the first elected black trans woman in the United States, just recently started drawing parallels between fascists and anti-fascists, right? And we have to realize that this is the whole point of the liberal system, is to draw all of this struggle back into the confines of the state and away from where the people have power, because that's what's going to cause actual change, is when the people stand up and the people decide. And so, yeah, I think that this also draws questions about representation and leadership. I don't know how many of you have read the book Taking Sides. Is an anthology. Cindy Milstein wrote it, or compiled it. It has a lot of important questions about, what does it mean when we reject our political agency? What does it mean when we make the decision to just be an ally instead of an active accomplice? And this is something that we have actually been, trying to encourage people who are on the outer edges of our social circles to really take seriously, because, there's a lot of black leadership and indigenous leadership in the Twin Cities. And, one of my buddies who got picked up and charged with riot met with all the people in jail, and, there's not a single one of them that would consider the big nonprofits to be their leadership, right? And so I think that, again, it's important for us to look to the class and not to the left, because this is where the power lies, and this is where the struggle lies, and this is where the solutions are going to come from. Yeah, I suppose I could go on, but I'll let other people talk too.
Thank you, Jay. Yes? Do you want to say something?
I was just twinkling. I'm old. We used to do that a lot.
Yes, I think so. Coming to an end.
Before the end, I would like to say something. I would like to say a big thanks to Cam, who I don't know if he is watching us today. Without him, everything would, all of this would be impossible. He was the guy who brought everyone together. Most of the speakers, the magnificent people we had with us today together. And I have to say how important sometimes is when you do things and you mean it. When, for example, we had BeFest, and we brought Babylonia's festival that we do every year, and we brought people to speak from the States or from other places of the world. We don't do it so that we do a good event. We do it so that we create bonds and we create relations with people that we continue to have it also after the event, and that could lead to things like the one that happened today. That's why it's important when we do things to mean it and also to create bonds that's missing. And as I said before, it was a great opportunity for us to hear some things that came to us or in a halfway through the media that we try to follow, which is not connected, is not yet, we haven't yet made our own media, let's say, available so that platform so that we can follow something with credibility. So that's why it's very important to hear from you. And I really think that was an amazing event, and I was very excited that I watched it. Thank you all that you attended. And also I send again, as I said, I send my love to Cam, who is not here.
Thank you all for being here, the audience, Michalis, Lauretta, who just left because it's a bit late here, and all the speakers from US. Yep. So, and our translators here. But I think there is one question maybe coming from somewhere in the audience still. Is this a question or somebody wants? Before we end? Yes or no? Marietta, you want to? Yeah. Okay, we just have one last question. Yes.
I find our discussion and the things we hear from you very, very, very interesting. That's why I didn't want to close this so soon. So let me just make one last question, which concerns the schools and about what you talked about police in schools, which for me is very, very important. Because it also creates the mentality and it changes the mentality of the child itself. Here in Greece, we've had incidents of policemen outside schools, of course, never inside schools, carrying, for example, weapons for the protection of politicians. But there have been citizens' movements that in most cases have caused them to leave, because there can be absolutely no people with guns in front of children outside schools. So I'm wondering, how does this work in America, and where does this come from, this mentality? Because weapons only bring new weapons, and this changes, it creates an ideal in the minds of the children that we absolutely want to destroy. How do we address this?
Before we close, of course, I would like you to hear if you have some comments or you would like to say something last. This goes to everyone, also to Michalis here and all our comrades there that are online.
So this is Nick here in Seattle again. Our police department here in Seattle was just kicked out of schools, I think, pretty recently as well. They just voted yesterday to kick out teachers here, or kick out police officers that are in schools. And this is something I actually meant to look up, was the involvement of police in schools elsewhere, like outside the United States. It was just a thing of curiosity for me, because here in America, we just kind of accept it as part of the mythos here that police are just everywhere. And with the school shootings that have happened here, like, we've never had a school resource officer prevent a shooting, and that's one thing that factors into it as well. But there's also racism along with police in schools, where if you are to poll those officers that are in schools, if it's a majority white school, they often think of as the threat coming from the outside. But if it's a more diverse school, they think of having to deal with issues that are internal to the school itself. So that's like a major issue with the way that policing happens. Like just another example of racism in the school system is coming from the police naturally. I guess I don't really like kicking them out is great. Just like anywhere, like getting the police as they exist now out of anywhere is good. I don't know that I have anything else to add other than those two immediate thoughts.
Someone else would like to make some closing comments?
All right, I got to get back to work here soon. But one thing I would really like to mention as a closing comment, I haven't given a shout out to East African diaspora Somali community. They're really big in Minneapolis. I've been a big part of this. They did a fantastic job defending the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. So shout out to them. Also want to shout out to all former bastards who made the right choice. There have been several of them who have stepped away from the participating in this oppressive system, and want to make sure that people realize that we're just not out to destroy individuals, right? We're here for the institution. We're here for the system. So that's an important thing to note. And I feel like I had one more thing to say, but I completely forgot. So thanks, everyone. It's great to meet you all. I have to leave. See you.
You are now. So, can you all hear me? I just wanted to say thank you all again for having us on and giving space to hear what's going on in Louisville, Kentucky. We often get a lot of conversation, so we're happy to be a part of this national conversation. Also, if you want to keep up with what's going on, there are several ways to do that, and looking through Injustice Square on social media platforms to keep up with what's happening there. There you'll find information on our education things that are happening there, but also videos of what's actually physically going on in real time as it's happening. Because we have a challenging weekend coming up with a bunch of white supremacist groups coming in to counter protest this weekend. And so we too must be getting off of here in a few minutes so we can go and finish planning and preparing for that tomorrow. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you very much.
So I added some comments about schools before. I didn't intend for those to be my final comments. So I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts. One being thank you, and I'll say that again in just a moment, for giving everyone here a space to speak and communicate and connect. But the other thing I wanted to say was that in regards to the police being abolished, I guess I want to call for everyone to remain vigilant. Because it's true. I enjoy the former bastards comments because there have been a lot of people leaving. Like this has been extremely demoralizing for the police, and that's great. But at the same time, if we were to right now fire every police officer, what would happen to those officers? Would they become better because they don't have the power, or would they do something else that's also bad? And I think about that in terms of like local militias and other things like that too, that there still would be that would be just like one step. That would be one really, really good step. But I worry about like local fascist groups and other things like that, which already have a lot of connections to the police in general. But it's not the end of the war, so to speak. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we get a lot of questions directed towards our group, even though we don't really consider ourselves like major organizers here. of like, where can we donate money to the CHAZ? Where can we donate money to you or to other organizers? And what we do is we ask to redirect towards bail funds for protesters, like the different Black bail funds. And I know there's a list at bailfunds.github.io that has a few, but maybe look up locally to see where which funds could use money to handle what locally is the third demand of releasing all prisoners that are connected to this struggle, but also other struggles as well. But again, thank you for giving us the chance to speak.
I would just like to add that about news platforms that you suggested before, for example, or specific demands, or some bail money that's needed for, we can of course share and promote through our sites and through our spaces here in Athens, not only networks. So of course we should be more than happy, and we should contribute to that as much as possible. So send us what is needed to do what the best we can also from our side here, so that we also keep the interaction. And the last thing I want to say is that I hope it's not the last meeting. We can have we can have you want to? No, I said that, okay, let's not that be the last meeting. Let's keep in touch, and let's try really what we said before, to break the borders regarding our activism and regarding our will to fight for freedom and dignity. Thank you.
Okay. One last quote. I think that it's okay. I think that what is happening is it's kind of like encouraging, despite all odds. The thing that the bridges are kind of like happening, and exchange of experience. And I'll be looking forward for more movements on that. But nevertheless, we keep on looking the fight that goes on. It inspires us, and it kind of like sets off, I think, an era of challenging what goes on.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Our comrade Nodes wants to add something. Okay, if no one else wants to add something, either from the people here present or from our comrades online, we can close this discussion. I think it was an overexciting, very useful, amazing discussion. I hope the first of many to come. Thank you all for attending. Thank you all for giving your time, even with the time difference that made it very difficult for you to attend. And thank you for everyone who came here and participated. And fight the power.
Thanks, everybody.